Hello and welcome to Hot or Cold Take, where I present a take I have in D&D and you, the lovely commenters who have all the power, you tell me whether it's a hot or cold take. Today's video is about dragons and about how they kinda suck. So before we get into the things that aren't great, let's talk about the positives of dragons. Now, considering that the game is called Dungeons and Dragons, dragons need to be hyped up to be epic. They need to be final bosses, the culmination of sessions worth of dungeon crawling, of campaign ending, huge awesome monsters. The ultimate challenge guarding the ultimate reward. And the lore surrounding dragons given to us in the Monster Manual is amazing. It's really, really good. Because people who aren't familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, or who are just getting into it, are going to be familiar with what a dragon is, but what they're gonna know is that they're big lizard boys with wings who can probably breathe fire, and that's about as far as it goes. There is so much more to them that we get presented in the Monster Manual. In fact, I'm gonna show you. Because you see, a lot of creatures get about a page or two in the Monster Manual explaining what they're about. Dragons, they get... it's a lot of pages. And that's not even including dragon turtles, shadow dragons, draco liches, all sorts of stuff. This takes it way beyond what people would have seen in Game of Thrones or Harry Potter or literally any other fantasy setting ever. And it introduces us to variants and backgrounds and characters and a multitude of ways that you can incorporate dragons into a story. And this lore, all of this in here, it's perfect. And because dragons have a natural aging process from wormling to young to adult to ancient, you can really pepper dragons in at any point, at any party level, at any point in a campaign, and it all makes sense. Each of these variant types of dragons, chromatic, metallic, they have their own regional effects and layer actions and all sorts of variations that make them completely unique beings. They inspire fear and awe to people who see them, and they are, for lack of a better word, epic. But once you've made it past the regional effects and you've traversed through the layer and now you're engaging in combat with a dragon, well, that's where things start to fall apart. Dragons each get their breath weapons, their signature attack, their most powerful move they have against the creature, which is admittedly awesome. Nothing is going to be more epic to people, especially those who aren't too familiar with D&D, than a big old dragon doing a huge breath weapon of fire or cold or acid or whatever, and just annihilating a party. But that's really it, especially for younger dragons. They've got bites and claws and a breath weapon that's on a recharge. And that's about it. Really, they're just one good attack that's on a recharge and bites and claws, and a bag of hit points. Adult and ancient dragons, of course, they get legendary actions. If they're in their lair, they get lair actions, legendary resistance, frightful presence, they get a tail attack as well. They get loads of extra little benefits on top of everything, which really rounds them out. But it's not really enough. Even with legendary actions, lair actions, breath weapons, multi-attacks, frightful presence, there's still a lot left to be desired for the potential big bad of your campaign. The thing with dragons is, they can fly. A wormling has a fly speed of 60 feet, and everything from a young to an ancient dragon has a fly speed of 80 feet. Dragons really should be using that flight, but the problem is that once they get in the air, they only have one ranged attack, which is their breath weapon, which is on a recharge. Which kind of forces them, if they want to do any damage, to stay on the ground and brawl it out with the party. Which in turn makes them very susceptible to a lot of effects that will completely destroy them. And this isn't me just theory crafting right now, there's enough stories out there on the vast internet, of stories of adventuring parties absolutely trouncing dragons, of CR way higher than the current party level. I've even lived one of these stories as a DM. Now let's very briefly go over my experience with dragons, because I made an encounter for my level 7 party. There's 5 people in this party at level 7, and they had an NPC helping them, also a level 7 character. The party went through a dungeon crawl for about 2 or 3 sessions before they actually made it to the dragon itself and they got to its hoard. They were deep inside a mountain. The dragon swooped down from the ceiling, crashed in front of them, spreading its wingspan out and intimidating them before demanding gifts from them, and if they didn't provide adequate gifts, he was going to burn them. Some of them couldn't provide adequate gifts, so he decided to burn them. It used its breath weapon. It was a red dragon, so it breathed fire all over them, and everyone saved on the breath weapon attack, apart from one who had just turned into a giant ape, so he kind of just brushed it off. And also there's 2 monks in the party, so, you know, evasion. It moved back towards the back end of the chamber, having a fly speed of 80 feet. It kind of went back all the way back to the end of its chamber where it called its home. But one of the monks, on their turn, bonus action Step of the Wind, they had mobile, so they had 55 feet of movement anyway, hit it with an unarmed strike, stunning strike, and it rolled a natural 1 on its save for a total of 10. Now, I should point out here that this is somewhere between a young and an adult red dragon. I'd essentially mixed the 2 stat blocks from the monster manual. Now, a young red dragon has a challenge rating of 10, which means that a party of 4 members of level 10 should have a okay challenge against the young red dragon. No one should really die, but it should be a decent challenge for them. Now, I buffed a young red dragon, took some elements from the adult red dragon and inserted it into the young red dragon stat block to make this an epic encounter for my level 7 party, granted 6 members, but a level 7 party nonetheless. But my biggest mistake was not giving this dragon legendary resistance. It was stunned. Everybody moved up to it and absolutely dogpiled onto it. It was genuinely quite comical, especially because on the next round, they forced it to make a dexterity saving throw or be knocked prone, and it automatically failed because it was still stunned. A couple of people got natural 20s on their melee attacks against it because they had advantage, and the bard that had turned into the giant ape got the final blow and just ripped its jaw open in 2 and just murdered the dragon. I should point out as well that on initiative count 20, not only were there a few layer actions going off, but also minions were showing up through a portal to the elemental plane of fire that was near the dragon's horde. So some of the changes I made to the young red dragon, the armor class that says 18 from here, I buffed to 19. The hit points of 178, I moved to 200. Most of the stats I kept the same. I kept its breath weapon at 56 fire damage, which on a party of level 7s, you're looking at an average HP of somewhere between 40 and 50. If they fail, they could get knocked out in 1 hit, which is pretty nuts. The biting claws at plus 10 to hit, I think I might have moved to a plus 11 to hit, but mostly the same. Even in my party that I'm DMing, the highest AC I think is 19. So it's hitting more often than not with the biting claw, you know, if it got the opportunity to use either of those things, which it didn't. But then on top of this, I also gave it a couple of layer actions, which were listed on the other page here, when you can have magma erupts from a point on the ground. Normally in here it says a 20-foot high, 5-foot radius geyser. They need to make a dex save or take 6d6 fire damage. I essentially halved that, so it was a 10-foot high, 5-foot diameter geyser, and they take 3d6 fire damage, but the same DC on the dex save. And another one was a tremor shook out in the layer. They need to make a dex save or fall prone. I kept that exactly as it is, word for word, DC 15 dex save or fall prone. And I also came up with a little table to see what minions showed up. I had a table where I rolled a d6. Anywhere from 1 to 5 would have been essentially a mixture of Magmin and Azers that came in because they're on the elemental plane of fire. It was, you know, the higher I got, the more of them came in essentially. And on a 6, if the dragon had died already, on a 6, an ancient red dragon came through the portal. If it was still alive, then it would just be more of these Magmin and Azers essentially. But none of that really mattered, because the dragon was already dead. I'd buffed its AC, its attacks, its damage to its fire breath, I'd given it extra features, layer actions, and they just killed it in like 2 rounds. Now, that story alone is not conclusive proof that dragons are bad, because that dragon got exceedingly unlucky in that particular fight. But it does exemplify the problem, because that dragon couldn't just fly up. The ceiling went higher than the party could see. It went off into darkness in this mountain. The dragon, where it came from, could have gone up there and started raining down attacks from above, but it didn't have anything to use from above because it had just used its breath weapon in the initial attack, and then it didn't have anything else. It had to stay on the ground. When dragons get ganged up on the ground, they're actually not that hard to overcome. If your party's of a slightly larger size, maybe 5 or higher, it's actually reasonable to expect that the party can overpower a dragon, which isn't really a sentence that should exist. And yeah, of course, you can change things up from what's presented in the monster manual. I know I did. Please do. Homebrew to your heart's content. I really do encourage it. But that kind of proves my point, doesn't it? That if you need to homebrew what's in the monster manual to make it a real challenge for your party, then it's clearly not good enough in its current form, right? Realistically, as a solo monster, dragons don't really cut it. When they're surrounded by powerful minions or being used as minions themselves for a higher power, that's when dragons really shine. But what they're presented as, these huge, epic, campaign-ending level monstrosities, they just come up a bit short. The challenge rating each of these dragons are presented at, for example, an Ancient Red Dragon is CR 24. A level 20 party will annihilate an Ancient Red Dragon if it's by itself, even in its lair. Those challenge ratings are more of a guideline. I'd recommend personally, if you're running a campaign and want to include a dragon, I'd say whatever the challenge rating in the monster manual is, drop it by 25–30%, and then that's the level of the party you should introduce the dragon to, and then maybe even buff them on top of that. For something that's in the name of the game, that has all this amazing lore in this book, I can't put this over enough. The lore in here is great. It makes them sound amazing. For something that takes up so much of the book and such a focus is placed on them, they just come up short. It makes your combats feel cheap when you've put so much into creating this epic environment with this region that's getting affected by this dragon's innate magic, and they have to traverse through this lair and all these crazy traps and dungeon crawls to even get a chance of even seeing the dragon. When your combat's over in a couple of rounds, it feels really cheap. Don't get me wrong, they're good monsters, but from what they're presented as some of the strongest monsters in existence, they just don't stack up. And that is why dragons kinda suck. So was that hot or cold? Red or white dragon, if you will? Let me know in the comments because you have the power, and if there's anything you want to hear my take on, let me know in the comments too, because I might just do it. Please subscribe, enable notifications, press the videos on the screen, etc. Follow me on social media at Pete Quinnell. Thank you very much for watching. This was Warcaster.